This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything, from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 242 of the GardenDC podcast. What if you could talk to one of your gardening heroes? In this episode, I get to do just that when I speak with author Barbara Damrosch, dubbed the Julia Child of Gardening, about her latest book, A Life in the Garden, and her lifetime of accumulated gardening wisdom. The plant profile is on Centauria, and we share what's going on in the garden, as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with a last word on coaching seed birth by Christy Page of Green Prints. This episode, we're joined by Barbara Damrosch. She is a organic gardening legend, especially for those in the Washington, D.C. area. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm delighted to be on this with you.
Glad to have you. And so the occasion for having you on is your new book, A Life in the Garden by Barbara Damrosch. But before we get into the book and talk about that and some of your organic gardening advice, I think what we want to do is ask about baby Barbara and go all the way back to were you born with chlorophyll in your veins and a green thumb?
No, not at all. I don't believe in being born with a green thumb anyway. It's I don't know why some people end up that way. Really, a variety of reasons. I was born in New York. I was raised mostly in New York City, Manhattan. But I had access very early on to grandparents in Louisiana who grew up on farms. They weren't farmers anymore, but they were wonderful, wonderful gardeners. And I loved the flower gardens. I loved the vegetable gardens, everything about it. Eventually, my parents just couldn't stand not having Mother Nature as part of the family. So we got a little cottage in Connecticut we could hide in when my father, who was a doctor in New York, could get away. And so they just threw themselves into gardening. Us girls, I was one of three girls. We had our own little plots. And I didn't think mine was elegant or productive enough. And so my father sort of planned to maybe at some point, get you a better space to really have a good vegetable garden. And it didn't happen. It didn't happen. And one day my father was indoors socializing with some friends and somebody looked out the window and said, "Doug, do you know what your daughter Barbara is doing to your lawn?" And I had this tool that I was hacking away at the turf. And he ran out and realized that he was over a barrel. And at some point I did get my garden. And so I guess that was the great, inspirational moment when I finally could do it.
Did you pursue horticulture as a career, or what did you do?
Absolutely not. No. I was working on far into a PhD program on medieval literature and taught at three colleges. Really ended up just making my living as a writer, though. I was writing for all sorts of magazines in New York and things like that. But I just, wanted to grow my own tomatoes, damn it. So I took my son and we moved out to Connecticut, and I immediately started growing vegetables, and it was divine. I loved it. And I started writing about gardening instead of all the other things I was writing about, politics, feminism, you name it. But then no, suddenly it was all writing. And I wrote a book called Theme Gardens, which was about ornamental gardening. I needed some more money besides what I could earn as a writer in the country. So I started landscaping for people. I had a mentor named Mel Bristol, who was really a great teacher in that respect. And I knew enough by the end of a couple of years to start my own business. And that morphed to a more of a garden design than gardening installations. So, and again, more and more writing, more and more writing. And I
Mm-hmm.
eventually moved to Maine. I'd been very inspired by Helen and Scott Nearing, who wrote a book called Living the Good Life. And it was all about self sufficiency, a very popular topic in the 60s and 70s. And that was one reason I left the city. And so I I actually eventually ended up meeting Helen Nearing up in Maine, where my parents had sort of re-retired. They first retired to Connecticut, and then they retired again a little further north than Maine, and half an hour from where Helen Nearing lived. And so I went to her place for more inspiration, and there was this adorable guy named Elliot Coleman, who's we both knew about each other. We had books which were kind of competitive with one another. And he was very much a guru in vegetable gardening. And so we ended up together, and the rest is history. But that's a kind of a very quick wrap up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a race through everything, and we'll hit some of those highlights again as we talk. But I think what one thing stood out for me when I was reading in your book, and you're saying right now about the Nearings, is how many people I have heard who were inspired by them.
Yes, yes, a lot of them. Absolutely. They were amazing. Their book was very much tempting. I could do that. They make it sound doable.
I think Michael Pollan was one of the ones who was really inspired to get back to the land type of
Oh, yeah.
movement from them.
Yep, he
And
was.
they were definitely on the cusp, a bit ahead of that whole 60s, 70s, back to the
Yeah.
earth, back to the
Yeah, they
garden.
started doing it before the whole 60s. I mean, they were part of the reason it took place. It was more in the 50s. I think that they moved first to Vermont and then to Maine and started growing their own food and writing about it.
Besides the Nearings, are there any other heroes in horticulture that you have as influences?
Well, I mean, I can't think of anybody so much in horticulture, but one of the people I respect the most is Alice Waters, because she has this view, which I happily share, that it would be wonderful if we could simply teach every child to garden. It would be just the way you teach everybody eventually to drive a car or ride a bicycle or spell, things like that. It's just a great skill to have. And it may not ever be so important that you would die if you didn't have the food you grew, although that can happen to people. But it's a way of fitting yourself into the natural world, but it's learned how to nurture things. I just find it a fascinating activity. It's one thing to sit in a lab. It's one thing to stand next to a book, some kind of a chart or blackboard explaining science. But to be really immersed in it, this is a wonderful way to do it.
So true. And I think many children learn by doing versus
Hmm.
in the classroom. Some of them, we all have our different learning styles, and it could be
Yeah.
hard for them to learn, sitting and reading isn't what they excel at, but hands in the dirt could really help.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's really true.
Hmm. So many of our listeners are based in the Washington, D.C. region, and
Hmm.
they will be familiar with you from your weekly column that you did for the Washington Post from 2003 to 2017 called A Cook's Garden.
Yeah, it's a sort of interesting how that got started. Um, I was, they were reissuing a new edition of my first book, the Theme Gardens, which, as I said, was all about flowers and trees and shrubs, things like that. Gardens on special themes. It was fun to play with that. And I'm sitting there with Adrian Higgins, who was the garden editor at the time, and we never even opened Theme Gardens. He said, Barbara, how can we get people to grow food? And we talked about it and how important it is and how great it would be. Well, a whole year went by, and Adrian made a little pilgrimage up to the house where I lived in Maine with Elliot. And he spent the weekend. We had a delightful time. And I figured he had just come to meet Elliot, because Elliot had become quite famous and quite inspirational to a lot of people. But just as he was about to be driven to the airport, he said, "Now, I want to tell you the reason why I'm here. And I said, well, what's that, Adrian? He said, well, I want you to write a column about growing food. I said, no way. That's fantastic. And so I started doing it. And I had done one piece for him about that kind of thing, just as a feature. But we turned it into a weekly thing. And I did it for almost 15 years, every single week. And it was great for me because I'd written a lot, but it sort of made a new way of writing for me. It was much more personal. When you do something week by week, you're kind of using as inspiration something you're actually doing or something your friends are doing or something you've read. It can come from anywhere. And I liked the spontaneity of that. It was sometimes tough having, to do a weekly column. But it really made me a better writer, a different kind of writer. And so I always thought it would be nice to put all of that together into a book. Now, you can't put 750 columns into a book, it would be a monster. But I thought, well, if I could just take some of the ones I like the best. And I looked around, took a while to find a publisher. But Timber Press, which I've always liked, fell for it and said, we got to have this. I'd love to have this. So that's what we did.
Excellent. So those who weren't able to access that Washington Post column now can always find your wisdom in this book. And many of us watched you on the PBS series Victory Garden when you were on there in the early 90s, and your show Gardening Naturally for the Learning Channel. And that was like 93 to 2003, I think, back when the
Well, it
Learning
wasn't that
Channel.
many.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it aired that long. It aired that
Yes.
long. We didn't film for that many years, but they still sometimes run it.
I found some back episodes of Gardening Naturally on YouTube and watched them over the
Yes,
weekend.
they are on YouTube.
Yes.
Yes.
So everybody can access it there because the Learning Channel is not the same TLC that it
Yeah.
was back then.
By the way, the book isn't only the columns from the Post.
Mhm.
Even the ones that I took, I rewrote. So it's there's a lot of stuff I've added as well. It isn't just that. I don't know. You'll see for yourself. And there's a lot of pictures.
Yeah, I would describe it as a gardener's memoir, but
Mm,
also gardening advice. So it's
yeah,
like
very
two
much so.
things married together. Is that how you
Mhm.
think about it?
Oh, yes. A lot of people think it should have been more of a memoir. A lot of people could have happily done without the memoir part. So everybody reacts a little differently to it. But I kind of liked the combination because I've always written in a kind of personal way anyway.
Yeah, I think it's very engaging. It draws you right into your story, as you talked about with us just now about your childhood start in gardening. And then it ends with your grandchildren in the garden. And I think
Yeah.
that is like, no pun intended, perfectly bookended.
Yes.
Where,
Well, that was on purpose. Yeah. It begins and ends with children. Children really they often really love gardens. When they get to be the teenage stage, they might, kind of complain if you force them to weed or or mow the lawn or something like that. But especially when they're and some people take to it and never get sick of it. But or sometimes it comes back later. Like my son was initially interested, went through a period of not being interested, and then now he and those kids have, quite appreciation for growing some of their own food.
I love how you describe them as just going out and kind of foraging for themselves and just
Yeah.
how they feel free to just grab a handful of kale and stuff it in their mouth.
Yes, that was Elliot's kids, grandkids mostly, especially the two twin girls, Heidi and Emily. They would just munch all over the place. All of them used to do that. The berries, it's irresistible for children.
So let's start with your year in the garden, maybe, and walk through it that way and refer to your book and some of the things that I was reading in there. And so starting off your gardening year, I always think of as, the deepest part of winter when you're starting to plan next year's vegetable garden.
Mm-hmm.
And do you do it by starting with catalogs, with last year's seeds? How do you start that planning for the next year?
Well, Elliot and I sit down and we make a list of what we have to have. Now, I will have to say that we garden year round. That's one of the things that he was really a pioneer in. I mean, people could do that in California and the South long before we were doing it. In the South, in fact, sometimes winter was the best time for them to garden if it was extremely hot in places like Texas. But the way we do it here is we have a greenhouse attached to the house. Ours is kind of fancy. We also, in the book, you'll see pictures of much more simple ones that you can do much more cheaply and easily, and quickly. And the farm itself has a lot of 50-foot greenhouses. Some of them are 100 feet long, and we grow and sell vegetables all year long. And so we don't really think of the gardening season that it's a 4-season thing for us. And so we've been eating things out of our little home greenhouse all winter long. Spinach and some kale, carrots. They're absolutely a lot of these things taste better in cool weather than warm weather. But the outdoor part is going to be a little bigger, of course, more extensive. So we each allows, like I'll say, we've got to have some cilantro, and he says, "Oh, please, do we have to?" He hates it, that kind of thing. So we both have the liberty to put in something that's just for our own particular tastes, but usually we'll agree. And we have a close connection with Johnny's Selected Seeds, which is a Maine seed company. And so we know that the seeds that they have, well, they're terrific seeds for one thing, but we also know that they have great varieties for our climate. And so we just put in an order and the seeds come. Some we have already in a cabinet, left over from before. Sometimes we'll save our own seeds if they're open pollinated varieties that aren't hybrids, which don't breed true to seed. So that's the way it begins. And then we wait until the soil is diggable, because that is a big problem. It was terrible this year. It just seemed wet on top of wet. And you can't really, till or even turn under very successfully. It makes the soil sort of glom into hard clumps, and it's better if you can wait till a drier day and then get it all ready. But there really isn't that much to do. After a while, you just plant your seeds, or we start a lot of them indoors in little pots. Actually, they're soil blocks. Soil blocks are a bit of an investment, but they're a wonderful machine, hand machine that you just plunge into. It's a sort of a plunger effect into a pan full of potting soil, and it makes these little clumps that you can. They're very good at sort of holding together without crumbling. You wouldn't think they would, but they do. And you don't have to have all these pots. You can have them just spread out on a piece of plexiglass or something like that, or in a flat. And so there's not much investment involved except for some good potting soil mix. So there we are, and in they go.
I love the soil blocking too, because it eliminates the use of one more type of plastic in the garden.
Yeah, exactly. And also it gives the roots, I think the roots are happier when they don't have a rigid frame around them, and they're more ready to go. They stop when they come to the bare, and then you can get them in and they'll take to the planting a lot more quickly than something that's been in a plastic pot.
And you said you like Johnny Select Seed. Do you try to do something new every year or experiment, or do you always go with the old standbys?
It depends. Well, often, sometimes there's new additions to the catalog, and sometimes it will replace something we've been growing because they've improved it somehow. That's a wonderful thing about horticulture. People are always making it better. I mean, and I love heirlooms, but even heirlooms, sometimes there's a better strain of a certain heirloom that's an old-fashioned variety. Oh, it varies.
Yes, I was going to say there's always something going out of stock or coming in that you want to try. So that's always great. Let's start off. I always think of the beginning of the season as peas and radishes. Do you have any particular favorite peas or tips? Are you a edible pod pea person?
We often grow those, but we will be more apt to just grow some shelling peas in a little row. I mean, sometimes we'll do something like scarlet runner beans just because they have this beautiful red flowered vine. And strictly speaking, they're beans, not peas. Children really love them, and pollinators really love them. They're wonderful. They're wonderful hummingbird plants because they have the kind of shaped orange red blossom that is a magnet for hummingbirds. So we love having them around and nurturing them. Butterflies too, bees. It kind of has a little bonus to it, that particular one.
Yeah, I like that one a lot too. And then on the radishes, are you a big fan of crop successions, like doing
Yes. Definitely.
several batches of radishes, or are you all at
Absolutely.
once? Yeah.
No, they don't play the all at once, the one at a time game. You have to sow a little bit of it, just a few feet, really, and then after a while, sow some more because they'll get big and tough and old if you leave them there forever. A great, huge, massive planting, unless you're selling them. But yeah, those are always there.
And how do you prepare your radishes? Are you eating them straight from the garden, or are you a fan of cooking them?
Oh, good question. Pretty much we like them raw. Elliot likes to dip them in salt. I just put them in my mouth, wash them off.
Yeah, I like a little salt myself, and I know some people like the butter, the
French breakfast is a really nice kind, and we haven't seen it lately. It's kind of become too old-fashioned. I don't know, but we love French breakfast. It's just that's the name of a old-fashioned variety. Kids love. It's a great thing to have as a child's first crop. They're so easy to grow, and you pull them out, and there's this little red thing, and it might be a little spicy for children, but but it doesn't really matter. Even if they don't eat them, they've grown something that people eat, and it's kind of a thrill for them.
And I agree, that's one of the best introductory crops for kids to grow because they're so quick.
Yeah, they're so quick. Kids don't have like to wait weeks and weeks for something to germinate.
Yep.
Yeah.
Most of us don't.
No.
And that brings us to carrots, because that's what really tries my patience, is how long carrots take to germinate.
Isn't that infuriating? Yes. Once they do, though, if you plant a row too quickly, you can start thinning, and you get these tiny, tiny baby carrots that you can eat from your thinnings. In fact, thinnings are a great resource. A row of lettuce, that sort of cut and come again system where you cut it and then it regrows, as opposed to a head lettuce where you take that head and that's it for that head. So you have a row of cut and come agains, and that you plant them really close together, but then you thin them to maybe 4 inches apart, and you eat so you'll have a thinnings salad. I think there's a picture of it in the book. Maybe not. Maybe it's in one of my other books. I can't remember, but they're so tender and lovely that it's a delicacy, not a something for the compost pile. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you'll pay a lot for that at a fancy restaurant to have those those little baby greens, as we call them.
Exactly. Yes.
You were talking about Elliot not liking cilantro, so that brings us to our cool season herbs. And I'm personally a huge cilantro fan, so I have a big, thick row of it growing right now, but much more than I could possibly use all at once. Do you have any tips for maybe storing or getting more long use out of fresh cilantro?
Oh, that's a good question. It's not one I've ever tried to dry. You could try drying it, but I'm not sure that's the best one for that. Let me think a minute. You could probably maybe put some in some vinegar and see if it can lend some flavor. Herb vinegars are very popular. People usually do things like tarragon. I don't know why you couldn't try it with cilantro, or just they'll also volunteer themselves. They'll drop their seeds, and sometimes I never have to plant them. They just sort of pop up, and they'll do their popping up a long time during the summer. There's just this little patch up there where I can always find some. That'll happen with other things too.
Yeah. I find especially arugula is my most rampant reseeder.
Oh, really? Interesting. That hasn't happened with me, but I'm trying to think of what does. I'm blanking on it. But dill. Dill's the best. Yeah, that'll go to seed in a nice way.
Yep. Yeah, it's unless you have a bag right under that umbral when it
Yeah.
releases the seed, it's hard to collect them. But yeah, I always just
Uh-huh.
throw a paper bag over the head and try to collect as
Yeah.
much dill seed as
Yeah.
possible. But of
Yeah.
course, spilling some is not a problem because you want more dill.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy, Jentz, and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks, or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Visit USAA.com/bundle.
Bundle savings are off total premium, not available in all states or in all situations. To qualify, auto policy must be active prior to property policy issue, subject to change. Restrictions apply. Membership eligibility and product restrictions apply and are subject to change. USAA means United Services Automobile Association and its affiliates, San Antonio, Texas.
Yes, you do.
So next in my calendar, and I think in your book too, is the potato, and you call it buried treasure.
Yes, we love potatoes. I mean, we're Mainers. It's a Maine crop. We're famous for potatoes up here. Yeah, they're and not a lot of people don't realize that how good they taste as a fresh vegetable. They think that all root crops are keepers, but some of them are unbelievably different and delicately flavored and wonderful when first dug up. You know, I mean, carrots are the same way. If they've had a frost, they suddenly become like sugar. They're so sweet. You know.
That's a good point about the potatoes, because I was going to say that so many other vegetables like that, root vegetables, need curing, like your sweet potato.
Yeah.
But having just the nightshade family potato straight out of the ground, of course, you want to clean it a little.
Yeah, you definitely want to. Yeah. But if you're storing them, we store them dirty. The same ditto with the carrots.
Do you have any favorite varieties of potatoes that you grow?
Let's see. Charlotte. That's the best, absolute best. It's a baking potato, and it's a European traditional one. I think somebody once told me it was Prince Charles's favorite potato variety. He's quite the gardener, and it just has a particular flavor that is just so good. And we'll grow some other sort of. I insist on having both kinds: the baking kind, the russets, like that one, and then the round, red ones that you like to have more for potato salad, because different recipes, work better with one or the other type of potato. And mashed potatoes too, I think you can do a baked potato mash, but they're so much easier to mash if they're the round yellow or red skinned kind that just have the little round ones, they just have a different texture to them.
And I find a lot of non-gardeners don't know that there are other kinds of potatoes, and that there are different textures, different flavors to them. So same with the sweet potatoes. There's a huge variation.
Yeah, I didn't used to ever grow them. The one time I had tried them, they were so viney and creepy and smothery that they would not stay put, and they kind of got in the way. So one day, though, I was in the home garden, and I decided that there was one edge of the garden that got particularly weedy, and there were a lot of weeds that would creep in from that particular edge of the garden. So what I did was I put a row of sweet potatoes right on that edge and directed all of their vines outward and they smothered all the weeds that were coming in. So it's, that's I talk about regarding how Mother Nature does the work for you. You just have to stand back and let it happen and not get in its way. I mean, in a nutshell, that's my philosophy of gardening. Compost happens, winter happens. You take advantage of all of the kinds of things that you can do with nature's cooperation. You just have to know how to do it.
I think that's great advice. And with the sweet potatoes smothering the weeds, that does bring up some of the hard work that we do in the garden. And I think it's kind of sometimes a disservice to new gardeners to tell them it's so easy. What is your advice to a new gardener?
Well, that is, you have a point. You do have to weed, but sometimes if you are very, very busy, you can put down a mulch, just like if you can find a place to get a few bales of straw, if there's a feed store or anything like that, anywhere you live, you just lay some down between the rows, and that can keep the weeding down. You can't completely turn your back on it because weeds will still get up in between the plants and things like that, but it will cut it down and just make it a little less daunting. But I also find that weeding has a kind of a rhythm to it. It's funny. I will sit here thinking, I don't have time to weed. I've got, my desk is full of stuff I have to do. I'll only go out there and weed 10 feet. And then I'll come in. If I can just do that much, I'll feel better. What happens is I go out there and I start weeding. 3 hours later, I finally get back to my desk because it just keeps drawing me on and on. So there's just something very meditative and quiet and kind of good for you to do all of this stuff. There's different ways of looking at it. One thing I would say I just don't want to leave this out. Never put any kind of poisons in your garden. Don't try to kill bugs. There's a lot of bugs that eat other bugs, and an awful lot of that can happen on its own. You won't know it's happening, but if you are spraying a lot of toxic stuff everywhere, none of it's going to happen, the good or the bad. As far as the bad ones, when occasionally you'll get something that you want, like Japanese beetles or whatever, you can pick them off. So that's like my second favorite way because it doesn't harm anything except, of course, those beetles, which might be maybe the next robin's favorite thing to eat. So my number one solution, and again, I like mechanical solutions, not a chemical solutions. I'll put down a barrier so that the bugs can't land on the crop. So it's either something like Rime, which is that white spun bonded polyester fabric that it's very easy to find at garden centers, or you can order it from Griffin Greenhouse Supply or something like lots of places. And it's very lightweight and it just keeps things from landing. And it lets in air, it lets in water, it lets in light. And so that's one solution. Then another one, something Elliot did with squash beetles, they were attacking the little plants. And he took some window screen, not the metal kind, the kind of vinyl mesh. And he made little tents, little teepees out of it and put them over each plant and with some kind of thing to hold them in place, maybe a little sort of homemade staples or rocks or whatever it was he did. And it was just like perfect because it let in, again, the light, the water, the air, and the squash beetles didn't eat up the squash.
Yeah, those are such great inventions. And like I'll use hardware cloth to make a similar cage to do that, or just throw a window screen on top of something, strawberries just to keep the birds out when they're at their most ripe peak and you're just trying to beat the birds.
Oh, please, the time that I had these wonderful strawberries and the robins were just out there in droves and I just put Rime over it. And I would just turn it up to get to the berries, and then I'd put it back down again. Rime was the original brand of this stuff, like the way Kleenex is for what we now call facial tissues. It was just so brilliant. People just kept calling it Rime, even though by now there's lots of different brands of it. And it's fairly easy to find.
Yeah, I still call it remade too, but cover cloth, you'll hear several different names for it. A
Right.
row cover or cover
Row
cloth.
cover,
Yeah,
floating row cover.
yeah.
Yes,
You'll see the more
because you can
generic name.
actually just float it over. You can just lie it on. Sometimes people will put like wickets. I mean, you can make these wickets that are just like if you've ever played croquet, it's like a huge compared to real croquet wickets, a piece of like 9-gauge wire that you've made a U out of, and you stick the two ends in so that you have a wicket, and you make these wickets several feet apart down the row, and then you lay some kind of remay or something like that on top of it, and that it doesn't touch the plants at all. But if you're doing it floating row cover style, you just lay it down, and most plants don't mind it having that lie on them anyway. So either way works.
And I think a lot of the points in your book are about, of course, soil health, and you're talking a lot about organic gardening. One of the stories you tell is about following your local horse stables when you were first starting to garden and collecting a bag full of aged manure whenever you could stop by and beg some off
Yeah,
them.
and kept a bag and a shovel in my car or my truck, and yeah, and they were happy to get rid of it. We are now sort of getting away from acquired inputs. If you have livestock of your own, and for a while we kept chickens, and we would rotate them around the farm and the gardens, having them poop on this section and then this section and then that section. And so that was wonderful way to fertilize and be sure that you were getting something that was safe. If you buy stuff, even if it's a fairly reputable source, you really never quite know what you're getting. And that's why making compost is such a great thing. You just have a pile or a bin where you're piling garden wastes on and making them into fuel for your garden. And it breaks it down into this very nice textured stuff that you add it to your soil, and it helps the texture, the aeration of the soil, as well as putting nutrients in and supporting all of those wonderful little visible and invisible creatures that make up fertile soil. It's a system, fertile soil, not a thing. It's a performance.
Getting back to our calendar year, and we were talking about potatoes and the nightshade family, so we have to talk about, of course, tomatoes.
Tomatoes.
Usually everybody's entryway vegetable that they have to grow themselves. So
You're so true.
Yeah.
You're so right.
And what are your top tomato tips?
Oh, tomato tips. Gosh. Well, I like to grow them vertically if I can, up some kind of, we have these metal posts and then a cross post linking them together about, 8 feet up, 7 feet up in the air. And then we put strings and wrap the vines around this. We do this with a lot of different things, but tomatoes are only one of them, with little plastic clips that you can buy that hold the vine to a string, and then tie it everything at the top, and they'll climb up like that. But if that's a little beyond what you want to do, another thing you can do is go get some kind of metal cylinder that you can put down in a circle and plant one tomato in the middle and have it climb up. And you have to have this mesh that's got big enough holes that you can put your hand through and pick the tomato. So that's something, there's a picture of that in the book that you could get at the hardware store in a big sheet and cut it to size and make these things. So that's one way to go about it.
Yeah, I think tomatoes, there's determinate and indeterminate, meaning vining, and they go on forever, and they will scramble along the ground unless you train them up on these kind of supports. And I always get asked, why bother, aside from the space issue, if you're in a small garden, but also it's for the ease of picking.
Yeah, it's that too. And also sometimes soil diseases or worms or things like caterpillars can mess up the fruits. Sometimes if you it can be too moist sometimes to have tomatoes lying on the ground. So you put some straw around it and have them just sitting on the straw, and then pick them that way. And it protects them somewhat.
And that could be true of the next crop I was going to bring up, were like the cucurbits, so squash, cucumber, pumpkins that, they're going to vine along the ground. You can train some of them up, but it's always good to put a support, I find, under the ripening fruit. Like, do you put a piece of slate or anything else under like a pumpkin or a squash?
Sometimes, occasionally, a mulch can help, but yeah, I don't know if I've been that much in love with a pumpkin to bother. But uh, yeah, you can.
And for squashes or cucumbers, are there any particular varieties that you like to grow?
Not really. There's always too many cucumbers. So, let's see. There's one called Socrates that we grow because it's good in greenhouses. And so we'll often have them protected to get them earlier and stuff like that. So that's the one we would grow if we could get hold of it. Squash, let's see. I love spaghetti squash. They're these great big blimps, sort of pale yellow oval things, and you cut them open and run a fork through you cook it, you bake it in the oven, and then you run a fork through the flesh, and it makes little strands, almost like they look like spaghetti. And I find those absolutely delicious. So that's one I sometimes grow. I like to experiment with different ones. I'm trying to think of something that stands out. I just like to try everything, and then sometimes my tastes change. But I can't think of any one other variety that is like I must have it.
What about zucchini? That's one that, as you said with the cucumbers, you tend to get a lot.
You could grow like zucchini in your sleep. It's that easy. Everybody has too many zucchinis, so that's its worst flaw. It's too prolific. But I kind of like to have the yellow kind. Sometimes it's called a yellow zucchini, but sometimes it's just like has a name like Gold Bar, or it's maybe not a zucchini, but it's that a kind of summer squash, same kind of plant, but you can see the yellow so easily, and you can find them easily, and they're just as tasty as the green ones. And the green ones sort of look too much like the rest of the plant that you have to kind of hunt for them. But before you know it, you've neglected to do that, and there's these gigantic, like torpedo-like things lying there hidden under those big leaves.
Yeah,
So I like the yellow kind.
I think that's a great tip, because same thing with green beans, I find.
Yeah.
I'll grow some of the purple varieties
Yeah.
because you can see them easier, because green beans will hide from you too.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the purple doesn't hold up as purple when you cook it, but that doesn't matter. It's identification in this case.
Exactly.
That's a great trick. Yeah.
So our last vegetables I think we'll go over is corn. And I was
yes.
looking at your corn chapter, because I think there are just, so many varieties to grow. But usually the problem we find in our area is just everything likes to eat corn, from raccoons to...
That's true.
Yeah. So do you have any tips for getting that corn to harvest?
Yeah, that is the biggest deterrent, the coons. And you really almost have to fence your garden if that's happening. I mean, that's asking a lot. But you can use that fence. You can grow things. You can grow tomatoes up your fence. You can do all kinds of things with your fence. It keeps other things out too. Deer can go through the garden. All sorts of things can go through the garden. But and you need, of course, a sturdy gate, and remember to shut it, things like that. Corn that's only one of the reasons why maybe it's not the best crop for a beginner. Everybody wants it because it's so incredibly delicious. Sweet corn when it's first picked and all of that. But you don't get a lot of bang for your buck. You get a couple of ears per stem if you're lucky, and you have to have a lot of stems to get a lot of corn. So it's sort of the opposite of zucchini. There's never quite enough from my mind, but it doesn't keep me from growing it. I love sweet corn, and so we always do it. One thing to know about it is that it doesn't germinate in cold, so it will grow. It's amazingly hardy as a plant, but where you live, of course, in DC, it's much warmer, and so this may not apply. But we always start them indoors where it's warm, and then when you've got these little shoots, then you put them in once it's gotten warmer, and then they do fine.
Yeah. And like you were saying earlier, with certain vegetables are better fresh and straight from your garden, corn would be that number one in my book.
Yes, it would. Although there are some that I just keep on hand for succotash or not necessarily the melt in your mouth, eat off the cob experience, which is so great for summer. But you can also put them in stews and salads, and they're more versatile than people think. And if you've got one that is not like picked 10 minutes ago and raced into the garden, and there's a lot of ways you can eat it, and it'll be perfectly good.
So one of the quotes I loved in your book is, at the end of the gardening day, you will feel what I call the good kind of tired.
Well, I love that phrase too. Yes, it expresses the way I feel when I've had a long time in the garden. Yeah.
And you go on to say the kind that gives you a healthy appetite for dinner and a sound sleep.
That about sums it up, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think we can all relate to that, really good day out in the garden, and you've been out in the fresh air and you sleep better than you've ever slept.
Yes, that's right. It's true. Absolutely true. I'm looking forward to spring coming along at an even more rapid pace.
And so recently I read that you are giving up the 4-season garden, the day-to-day gardening for it. Can you talk about that experience?
Well, the farm itself. There's a big difference between our home garden and the farm.
Correct.
The farm. We live at the farm. It's right there. I can see it from here where I'm sitting. But we're both in our 80s now, and we just wanted a little bit more time to ourselves. We were hiring nice, strong, young humans, and that did help. But just the responsibility of it, we wanted to write a little more and play a little more and just kick back a bit. And so we advertised for a young couple, a couple younger than us, and found this man and wife that we absolutely adore. And, they're using our own principles by which we've always grown our crops at the farm, and they're selling the same way we did and doing pretty much what we did, except first thing they did was have a baby. You can't believe it. The first day they opened the farm stand, the first week they gave birth, and we were absolutely delighted in having a little girl like that on the farm. So that's a good thing. A good thing.
And how does that change feel for you and Elliot?
Well, it's just a little more relaxed, and we go out to dinner more and take little side trips. And there's always somebody, to make sure that the gates aren't left open or the vents are not opened on the greenhouse when it gets hot. And, there's always somebody keeping an eye on everything. And we've had farm managers who did a very good job of that before. But at this time, it's even more freedom than we had before. And we just like having our little home garden. It's just like normal people go out, and a few steps away, there's everything we want.
Yeah. So back to the kitchen garden.
Yeah.
Full circle.
Yeah.
So how can our listeners contact you to find out more?
The best thing is to go email me at Barbara@fourseasonfarm.com, and that's spelled out FOUR. Barbara@fourseasonfarm.com. And there's no S at the end of season. And I can't promise to answer every email, but that is the best way to get in touch with me.
Thank you, Barbara. Any final advice for our food gardening listeners?
No, just do it. Even if you're inexperienced, you'll learn while doing. We also have a website, and I can't remember what it is, but if you Google Barbara Damrosch and Elliot Coleman, you'll find it, and it'll have information about our books. We don't do much public speaking anymore because, again, we want more freedom and a more relaxed life. But anyway, so there you have the website, or a way to get to it, and also my email.
Yeah, I'll include a link to your direct website for them.
It's not the one that's 4 Season Farm. It's just us, our names.
I think it's Elliot and Barbara.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
I'll definitely include that link in our show notes. And thank you so much, Barbara.
Well, thank you, Kathy. Yeah, it was fun to talk to you.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of their lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for the stay.
Centauria plant profile. Centauria species are an annual or perennial flower, depending on which species you are growing. The annuals are commonly referred to as cornflowers, and the perennials as knapweeds. There are about 80 perennial Centauria species. Most Centauria flower in shades of blue, purple, and white. Their flowers resemble thistles, but they are not thorny or sharp. The blooms are pollinator magnets and are often grown in cut flower gardens. Centauria prefers full sun and well-draining soils. Centauria cyana is also known as bachelor's buttons. They bloom in late spring in bright blue and other hues. They are hardy to zones 2 to 11. They are easy to start from seed and are deer and drought resistant. Centauria montana is also known as mountain bluet. It is a perennial that is hardy to zones 3 to 8. You can remove flower stalks after they bloom for a sparse rebloom in late summer. Plants need to be divided every 2 to 3 years. Centauria is native to Europe and is used in folk medicine as an herbal digestive. Note that several species of Centauria, in particular the spotted knapweed, Centauria maculosa, are considered invasive in some parts of North America. Centauria, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, it's been a really wet one, but I'm happy to see the blooms of my various spirea, cultivars, and abelia plants. Over at the community garden in our little pollinator strip, the calendula is looking sunny and bright. In the garden tips that we shared on our social media this week, we advise to regularly look under the leaves of your tomato, eggplant, potato, and pepper plants for hornworm eggs. They look like a tiny little green BB. Scrape them off and destroy them if you see them. The May 2025 issue of Washington Gardener magazine is now posted to washingtongardener.blogspot.com. Inside this issue, you'll find a cover story on the British ambassador's garden, and we feature profiles of the party-time houseplant, native fleabane, a new ironweed called Prairie Princess. We take you to the National Gallery of Art's exhibit on little beasts, and our birdwatch column talks about wood thrush. In addition, we share the best practices for lush lawns. Our edible column is all about growing stevia, a true super plant. We share modern cottage garden tips, garden book reviews, and a reader contest. Our insect column focuses on the azalea minor bee, and we introduce you to local rose breeder Ben Williams, and much more. In local gardening events, if you're in the Washington, D.C. region, you'll want to attend the Mid-Atlantic units of the Herb Society of America and National Herb Gardens Under the Arbor event on Saturday, May 31st from 1 to 4 p.m. This is a casual, free drop-in program that takes place in the National Herb Garden at the U.S. National Arboretum in Washington, D.C., and this year they will feature herbs that rock, meaning herbs that have been mentioned in songs, such as Scarborough Fair. That same day, Saturday, May 31st, the Garden Conservancy is hosting 2 open gardens, part of their Open Days programs, and those are both in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, near Annapolis, Maryland. You can find the descriptions of both these beautiful private hidden gems at the Garden Conservancy website at gardenconservancy.org/open days. You can purchase your tickets in advance there to get access to one or both of these gardens. They'll be open from 10 to 4 that day. And then on Thursday, June 12th, Common Goods City Farm in Washington, D.C. is hosting a garden party. It's a casual farm-to-table experience with live music celebrating freedom through movement and ecstatic dance. To purchase your tickets for that and to see more information, go to commongoodscityfarm.org. Happy gardening!
This is Christy Page with Green Prince with the last word on Coaching Seed Birth the Natural Way, a story by Pat Stone. I'm father to 4 who were born in such varied places as the Bat Cave Valley Clinic and our bedroom. So I've done my share of childbirth assistance, from playing the coach, all right now, the next contraction should be in 15 seconds, remember, use the breathing we practiced, to acting the supportive partner. Would you like a wet rag, honey? Should I rub your back? To being a tear-filled parent when the child is finally born. Look, everyone, it's a baby. So this spring, when I set up my seed flats for brocculus, tomatoes, sweet peas, and 4 o'clocks, I thought I'd put my experience to good use. Yes, I decided to coach my plants through their seed bursts. Fortunately, I'd taken this birth coach stuff pretty serious and kept a list of notes. True, some of the tips didn't look too useful. A seed tray probably wouldn't appreciate a cup of ice chips or having me massage its adductor muscle, but the rest looked worth following pretty much in order. The first tip was simple. Talk to her. Keep her company. I could do that. You'll do great, seed tray, really. Don't worry. This will all be over soon, and we'll have a whole set of wonderful seedlings. Number 2, give her plenty to drink, but no food. Okay, now seeds, here's some water. But no fertilizer, not until you're up and growing. Number 3, help her stay warm. I didn't have any seed-sized robes or slippers, so I covered the tray with a plastic sheet. Number 4, time the contractions. Well, dears, it's been 6 days. The packet said germination would take 5 to 7, so hang in there. Most of it's over. Number 5, be patient. Don't put any pressure on her. Of course, if you want to take 8 days, that's perfectly all right. I understand. Number 6, hold her hand. Will the side of the box do? Number 7, tell her you love her. Tell a bunch of seeds I love them. Number 8, don't be embarrassed. Do it. All right. I love you, seeds. I love you, really. Number 9, keep encouraging her. You're almost there. Go for it. You can make it. Push, push, push. Look. There one is, in the corner. See, there's a little pale seed cap starting to come through the dirt. And over there, there's another. They're sprouting. We did it. I'm a father. Yippee! Plant tags for everyone. Look at them. Aren't they just the cutest seedlings you ever saw? I tell you, it was worth all the trouble. It really was. This has been The Last Word by Christy Page at greenprince.com.
Thank you for listening to Garden DC. You can become a listener supporter for as little as 99 cents a month by going to the supporter link in our show notes or directly to podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/GardenDC/support. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on social media at WDC Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, and Pinterest, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Please take a minute to share us on social media with #GardenDC so other gardeners can find us too.